Welcome for SNBN, sorry, SNBN series. So, as folks from here, as well as those joining from afar, including those from Singapore, my greetings and welcome to this session of discussing Dharma. As usual, before we go into the text, we'll sit quietly for a few minutes. So find yourself in a comfortable posture, whatever that happens to be, and try to settle the mind and the body. Take a moment to visualize the merit field. It could be simple as just visualizing Buddha Shakyamuni in the space in front of oneself. Or it could be a complex one with all of his disciples, lineage masters, coming to the present moment in however way one does it. Try to think of the Buddhas and his disciples, particularly through their qualities, their inner qualities. Broadly speaking, they could be divided into two: the realizations part and the degrees of abandonment, degrees of cessations they have obtained. In the case of the Buddha, both of these qualities have reached full combination. All the obstructions, obscurations having been completely rendered irreversible, eliminated and irreversible, whereas the realization paths have reached full perfection. And those of his disciples, whatever level of advancement they may be, they share in similar qualities of realizations, abandonments, though of lesser degrees, but nonetheless, having directly tested or experienced actual true path and true cessation, at the very least. Think of those qualities and think of how they are responsible for who they have become. In terms of their own individual achievement, security, sense of peace, joy, as well as the potential of being an exemplary role model for others, and also equipped with the ability to show the right path, unerring right path to others from their own experience, at least to the level they have already attained. That means, in the case of the Buddha, unlimited capacity to lead sentient beings, to show the path in varying means, methods, because of his or having attained all these qualities to the full culmination. These realizations include qualities like great compassion, great loving kindness, of course, tolerance, skillfulness, patience, all of those at the perfected level, as well as that of the cessations, having eliminated both the afflictive and cognitive obscurations. Feeling inspired by these qualities, making us wonder how I might have achieved this where I am right now. I also think of fellow sentient beings surrounding us. Think of them as well. But clearly drawing on our connectedness, interconnectedness, interdependence, mutually benefiting each other, mutually dependent. Drawing from the strength of one's reflection on interconnectedness, interdependence, feel inspired for both oneself and others. It's imbued with these qualities of love and compassion going towards our fellow sentient beings, as well as inspiration and aspiration, appreciation, enjoyment in terms of the qualities of the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, Arhats, Arya beings. Let's now recite this homage to Shakyamuni Buddha together. Let's stay in this motivation of cultivating bodhicitta for the sake of all sentient beings. Let's stay with this for a while. The state of Buddhahood, for anyone to achieve the state of Buddhahood, it has to be preceded by achieving liberation, personal liberation from samsara. Not necessarily by pursuing it or by aspiring to it as one's main goal of the path, But by virtue of how the state of full awakening is attained, one has to go past liberation and only achieve it. But then, to achieve liberation, which means full freedom from the bondage of afflictions and karma induced by them, one has to make sure, yes, this bondage is breakable, that afflictions can be eliminated. With that, definitely the karmas ensuing from them definitely will be eliminated. But the question is, are the afflictions subject to elimination? Can they be eliminated? There, our conviction must be in the connection between the afflictions and the root ignorance. For that connection to be understood and have full conviction, one is to first and foremost identify what the ignorance is and how that serves as the basis for all the afflictions. So in being able to identify correctly, unmistakably, ignorance within us, we have to first understand what it would look like, able to identify the ignorance. What would we be looking at? What does identifying it look like? So there, the question of true truths comes about. Although the subject matter of true truth is something not just exclusively found in the Buddhist texts, it's understood that even the non-Buddhists, at least in the Indian traditions, they do also speak of true truths. So in this regard, how would the true truths that we have to understand differ from those being identified by them? And within the Buddhists, how the philosophical tenets progressively refine, tune up their understanding of the true truths. So basically, irrespective of whether we have worked our way up those philosophical tenets one by one, nonetheless, we should have some rough idea what those lower tenets systems look like to be able to correctly understand true truths from the Prasangika Madhyamika point of view. And there it's not just a matter of identifying it, but also being convinced. Convinced in how the system of the true truths more particularly the ultimate truth, of course, with the support and the basis of the conventional truth. But ultimately, the ultimate truth has to be understood very clearly, correctly. Until we do that, we wouldn't be able to identify correctly the root of afflictions in the form of ignorance. So that's what we have to take into account in building the strength of our aspiration for full awakening for the benefit of all sentient beings, both in terms of feeling very strongly aspired to, and also supported by a sense of conviction that yes, it is possible to achieve it. Let's bring this up to the extent we understand, and let this all support this aspiration to achieve full awakening for the sake of all sentient beings. Let's use this session in complementing it further, strengthening it further. So with this motivation, let's pick up from where we left last time. So the topic about the nature of mind and the afflictions is very pertinent to what we just reflected on. So this question about the ignorance, of course, when it is laid out in the scriptures, even the scriptures kind of go about it in a step-by-step way, not right away, kind of dealing with the ignorance at the level of the prasangikas. In any case, ultimately it is supposed to reach there, arrive there, and then kind of unpack that and understand it. But the main thing is not to think of this as a mere philosophical exercise, but rather think more strongly about the psychological dimension of it, of how understanding it or not is so connected with our aspiration, freedom from the afflictions. Our afflictions, by their very nature, come to be because of their insistence on something objective out there. And that's the reason why these philosophical schools deal with this objectivity bit by bit, to the extent students at that level are capable of digesting. And then it's then pushed further and further and further until one arrives at the Prasangika Madhyamika's perspective, where all there is to be eliminated in terms of objectivity is completely exhausted, it's completely eliminated. And it makes sense how that would be the furthest one could go, and how that will leave afflictions with nothing to latch onto. It's almost like the afflictions, if they were to arise, in the face of having completely refuted any tinge of objectivity, it's been like afflictions would have nothing but to kind of deflate by itself with no lifeline. So that's the reason why Buddhist teachings begin with no self, and no self, though presented in varying degrees of grossness, yet nonetheless starting with no self is quite telling about what its stand is with regard to how the afflictions come to be. And in a way, one is trained to think in that direction, in that perspective, and eventually kind of build on it and refine it further and further. So the important thing is when we look into ourselves, and particularly when we are caught up in our afflictions of one kind or the other, one thing to look at is, of course, what's the story it is telling, how unfounded it is, etc. But deep down, what the entire story is based on, what the entire story is kind of smeared with, without exception, nothing, no empty space or spot is there. It is fully pervaded by that wrong perception. Like that of a painting on a canvas. No matter what color or what aspect of a painting you are talking of, it's all based on the canvas. So it's to the extent the canvas pervades all the entire painting. Likewise, the projection of a subjective reality pervades the entire line of the story that the afflictions are trying to tell. So that part we have to understand. Not just the gross stories by themselves, but underpinning those stories, what's the basis? What's the very, very foundation upon which those stories are being told? Okay, so with that, let's pick up from where we are, and then we'll also try to address some questions. I think, we have some questions pending from last time also. But there are certain points that I shared last time that I needed to still fill in and make sure that at least my ideas came across correctly. It may not be right, but okay. So this question about the nature of mind is so crucial. So crucial. I mean, in everyone's pursuit of happiness, joy, peace in a lasting manner, but more so for Buddhist practitioners like Buddhists who base their entire kind of hope on eliminating the afflictions once forever, no matter how many lifetimes it may take. And then with regard to the afflictions itself, kind of thinking along the lines of dealing with the afflictions on a manifest, at a manifest spatial level, deeper down, more deeper level, and then at the root level, even at further down at the instinct or latency level. So for such an aspirant, the nature of mind is so crucial to be understood correctly and to be kind of a subject of long reflection and deliberation as well. So, in a teaching by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, His Holiness was also calling for Buddhist practitioners to come to not just be complacent with what we have in terms of what the scriptures say, but using them as a base, try to come up with new ways of presenting it in tune with the new reality, particularly in this given age. Trying to know what the scientists stand is not so much to refute them, but to learn from them, and as well as know the differences if there are in our stance, and how to make sense of either of the stance, and then in view of this new reality, new kind of way, opposing stand point perspective, kind of to up the presentation of the Buddhists as well in tune with their time. And it is not something unprecedented, even in ancient time. If you look at the works of Dignaga and Chandra Dharmakirti, you will see how new, deeper ways of looking at things, how with the passage of time, because of the reality of how we have progressed in understanding things, there's this need of insights, not totally out of line with the basic Buddhist principles, of course in line with it, but nonetheless, vis-a-vis the contemporary new ways of looking, come up with fine-tuned position from the Buddhist path as well. So when we look at the works of Dignaga and Dharmakirti, you will see a progression of positions, of course, based on the basic principles of Buddhism. And if in one sense, one could say those seemingly new positions are already embedded in there, but they are not required at those times because of no opposition or no challenges faced to kind of address them. But with a new reality, one should kind of hone up one's own positions. That's saying not just for the sake of defending Buddhism, but for the sake of one's own personal practice also. Because in the face of new reality, one has to have, as what you call, one has to have conviction in one's path in the face of these new opposing, if they are opposing, and opposing positions. If they are kind of in sync with the Buddhist position, then of course more so we learn about this and kind of bring them in. So His Holiness was referring to the historical accounts of the writings of Dignaga and Dharmakirti. And then such discussions didn't happen after that. Whereas up until the time of the Dharmakirti, both the Buddhists and non-Buddhists gained from their discussion. So it seems like what you call defenses from the non-Buddhists continued after Dharmakirti, but none from the Buddhist path took them up. It seems like so. So we are not speaking in terms of kind of defending per se, but given the new reality, those understandings, and making clear what one's position would be from a Buddhist perspective, rooted in the basic principles, is very much needed for one's own personal practice, as well as for the sake of the Dharma itself, for it to pace with the time. It needs to have those fine-tuned positions kind of brought up. So it is in those respects that I kept, I mean, not that I know much, but I try to refer to science not so much as something to be attacked or something to be denigrated or depreciated, but rather as a way of learning from, and also kind of used as an asset to fine-tune our own understanding and deepening it. So with regard to this nature of mind, the reason why I brought up the self theory was that the idea of a similitude for a cause is not something totally new to the Buddhists. It's something even acceptable for modern science. In biology, they speak of somehow they came up with this idea, this position that yes, cells must come from prior cells. But at the same time, they kind of see that as a conundrum to be resolved. Thus, even Darwin himself had to kind of propose that maybe in so many long time, millions of years period, there might have been some way by which life could have come from non-life, which means non-self. Self could have come from non-self. But at the same time, what could have necessitated them to come up with this second basic tenet of self theory? Maybe they couldn't find any other way but for a prior self to be present, for a self to come. So that's not the same thing as saying mind has to come from a prior mind, because mind and body are different. But this concept of similitude is very much is not foreign to the scientists. That's what I'm presenting. So in this regard, yes, I was going to share another story. Yeah, His Holiness was saying, yes, we make this prayer. Do we say this in the at the Abbey? May I never be. Pardon? Yeah, may I never be separated from a perfect teacher in all the lives, right? In all my life. Do we say that? Okay. So he's already saying that, yes, we make this prayer, and this is premised on the fact that we are supposed to progress, progress along lives after lives. But what we really see in reality is not necessarily in tune with it. So, particularly referring to Tulku system, is another thing. I would be the right person to speak of this. Others cannot speak. I would be right to speak about this because I'm among Tulkus. I could be criticizing the Tulkus. And so he was commenting on the fact that at least what appears on the surface is not like the previous one, that the present one is progressing on where the previous one had left. So he was saying that we need to take things seriously. And but at the same time, he points out that in the case of the second Dalai Lama, when he was very young, maybe in the care of his mother, very young, he was able to compose very prolifically, and then had so many visions. So was Gyatso. I think he was the 10th Dalai Lama. Although he was it 10th Gyatso. At least one of those Dalai Lamas who passed away very early in childhood. He lived up to only 10th year, but by that time, even within that, so many visions. And in the case of the second Dalai Lama, he was able to compose. It sounded like he was very, very young, almost, very young, even maybe hardly walking. But what he would speak is poems or composition. So he was saying that not that there were no examples of such things, but compared to what we are supposed to be investing on, the harvest is not as much, the product is not as much. So basically, he was commenting on this supposedly progression. Because if you don't progress through lives, then the possibility of ever making to Buddha will not be there. And thus, from our own efforts, we should be kind of, jointly, collectively, as well as individually, we should be putting our efforts in making sure we get to see that as reality. At the same time, His Holiness was saying that, yes, generally speaking, yes, realizations are something to be kept to yourself, not yet. But nonetheless, given what is going around us, at least from among those who have been recognized as the continuation of the previous rebirth, and that too among those in whom signs were strong enough to point to their being the continuation. But what is happening They were just barely able to kind of verify that they are the continuation in one way, uh, kind of supporting the idea of rebirth. But at the same time, in terms of qualities progression, it's not progressing, it's even seemingly going down. So that doesn't speak well about the possibility of what you call spiritual progression. So merely being born and being able to show signs that yes, that's the continuation, the previous one is not enough. In this regard, I remember very clearly our dialectic school teacher, principal, the late Ken Gyatso. At one point, it became quite popular what he said. What he said of Tulkus. He was half jokingly saying it, but half seriously, playing with the young Tulkus of the same monastery, Tepung. So when they would come to Dharamsala for teachings, to attend teachings, whatnot, Gyala will be there at the dialectic school, belonging to the same monasteries. So they would have some affinity and some closeness, whatnot. And he would jokingly say, "What are you doing? You only serve as a supporting example for rebirth, but on the other hand, in terms of what we claim the possibility of progressively increasing in our achievement, in our realization, you seem to be pointing the other way. So you are Tumpe, you are supporting example for this, but what would be a defeating example for the other one." So at that time, I remember very clearly, it became so famous. It might have made to His Holiness, I think. And the Tulkus were also not upset, but they were really saying, "Wow, that was an eye-opening statement he made." But at the same time, as I mentioned last time also, the need, the need to prepare well for a good quality of death is also very crucial. And in that regard, one thing we have to very clearly remember is, of course, what we should remember is that citation from the sutra that was cited in Lamrim Chemu also, as well as in Vasubandhu's, not Vasubandhu's, I think in Vasubandhu's auto commentary with Abhidhamma-kosh. There also he quotes this sutra where it talks about mechanism of how karmas ripen. Of which the first one that would which ripen is the gravest one, positive wise, negative wise. The next one is whatever is close by, not whatever one is habituated in, but whatever is close by to the time of death. That is so important to remember. And then if there is no karma sticking out as being the close one at that time, then whatever one is habituated in, that's the only then it gets to ripen. Otherwise, not. So this master that I was supposed to look up, I didn't. It is not His Holiness mentioned in one of the teachings was this master along with his student, seemingly hermits, both of them hermits. Otherwise, it would be quite a chore to pack up everything every night. to wind down everything every night. So they must be hermits in the first place. Must have very little, but whatever they had, they would assume, can wholeheartedly think that they might not see it the next day. And that will come, I mean, we all can, that will come from our reflection and meditation on the, not just the certainty of death, but in the uncertainty of how and when it will come, which is 100% true, but at the same time, it's so difficult to come by. We kind of feel assured, like, do we have tomorrow? There's almost no doubt in us, right? Yeah, there will be tomorrow. I'll be doing this tomorrow. For sure. Which is clear indication that, oh, how can you say that? And to that extent, we are not prepared to die properly. Anyway, okay, so where were we? The third para. Okay. According to Sutrayana, from the viewpoint of the primary consciousness, that we already did. Now next paragraph. Okay. Within Tantrayana, both Dzogchen and the new translation. So when you say Dzogchen and the new translation, it's quite clear that Dzogchen belongs to the old translation school, right? That's the enigma. Both Dzogchen and the new translation schools, by the way, new translation schools means all the orders of Tibetan Buddhism except Nyingma, right? The new translations speak of the subtlest mind, which may be called the Rigpa, or the primordial clear light mind. In the Dzogchen system, Rigpa is said to pervade all states of mind, whether they are coarse or subtle. Coarse, such as the consciousness manifest during our everyday lives, or subtle, such as the subtlest clear light mind that arises after the coarse consciousnesses have absorbed or dissolved. For example, while dying or during special tantric meditations. Pardon? So how will it be changed?
Venerable taught this paragraph. She changed the words where it says while dying, she changed that to at death.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah. Yeah, but still we can, even while dying, we can say that, because while dying, the dying process, particularly the last 3 ones before the death, all those 3 final states of dying until the actual death, the last 4, they belong to the subtlest consciousness. They're so subtle that they are called subtlest. And from among them, the last one at death is called the subtlest of the subtlest. Because compared with the rest of the consciousness, those are so subtle. Yeah. So, Rigpa. So yes, I was saying Rigpa needs to be understood within its own context. Otherwise, Rigpa is used even within the scriptures itself in so many different ways. So how do you translate lo rik she sum in the Lorik? Lo Rigpa Sheba. Yeah, I cannot think of how it is rendered in Tibetan English. It must be because there are many Lorik texts, but I hardly read the English. Lo Rigpa Sheba. Pardon? I see. So lo Rigpa Shepa, that's one context in which Rigpa comes. And in that respect, lo Rigpa Shepa, they are all coextensive. And they are all coextensive, and they are different names for the same thing. So broadly speaking, it would be consciousness. But lo rikshe, how would you distribute lo rikshepa, lo rikpa? So that's one context in which rikpa comes, and there it means all consciousnesses, primary, semjung primary, secondary, afflictions, non-afflictive, positive consciousnesses, all of them. Yes.
I think it means awareness, knower, and consciousness. Or it's one way of translating it is awareness, knower, and consciousness. Those are all synonymous.
I see. Awareness, yeah, I mean, one has to come up with something, right? So, law Rigpa. So in that case, Shepa will be knower. Rigpa may be awareness. Lo is awareness. Okay, lo is awareness. Rigpa is knower. Yeah. Shepa is, yeah. Yeah, I mean, all of them, at least Rigpa and Shepa, both of them have very explicit connotation of knowing. Shepa means knowing, Rigpa means seeing. Yeah. So in any way, what my main point was, when we speak of lo Rigpa Shepa, in that context, Rigpa is coextensive with lo and Shepa, and they're all three encompasses everything consciousness, irrespective, positive, negative, primary, secondary. And then in another context, Rigpa is very specifically used to convey the exact opposite of marikpa of ignorance. Yeah. So there it is Rigpa. Rigpa is not that which is not just marikpa, not that which is not just not marikpa, that which is not just other than marikpa, but rather that which is diametrically opposite to it. That is called Rigpa. So that's more like the wisdom. So there, in the Prasangika perspective, Rigpa would be the wisdom, understanding, emptiness. But then in the context of Dzogchen, not that I know much, but in the context of Dzogchen, Rigpa is very specific. Usually it is separated from Sem. Sem is, again, so because it is used differently, one has to take this usage of the term Sem in the Dzogchen context with caution, not just taking it as Sem in general. Anyway, so in that respect, so when we have afflictions or whatnot, at that time, both Sem and Rigpa may be happening together. And so the main practice is to separate the two, tell one apart from the other. In that context, Sem is considered to be mistaken, whereas Rigpa is considered to be non-mistaken. Yet at the same time, it is considered to be little different from the mere knowing and clear, mere clear and cognizant aspect. Because Rigpa is considered to be much more subtler. So there's the closest that it comes to Rigpa, as understood in the Nyingma tradition. The closest that comes from the New School tradition, at least from the Gelug, will be the subtlest clear-light mind. But that is considered to be not manifest. Not manifest so long as the grosser consciousness are manifest. Whereas Rigpa is considered to be accessible, even in the midst of afflictions. Of course, not when one is giving in to the afflictions, but while one has afflictions, there is a way of kind of suspending, pursuing it, suspending one's investment in the affliction, but rather kind of almost like suspend that state and then let part of the mind look at it. Not kind of not give in to its not going along its story, not going along its story, and not kind of following in its footsteps, yet at the same time not deliberately suppressing or deliberately chasing it away, but kind of suspends, kind of keep that, kind of suspend it in a way, kind of let that be there without oneself falling for its exploits. And then in the course of doing that, I mean, outwardly it would almost look like doing nothing. So His Holiness, not that I have received any Dzogchen teachings or not, but His Holiness, on and off in the teachings, whenever there are relations, connections, associations, he would share from his Dzogchen experiences and Dzogchen understandings. And there he would very often emphasize how this way of almost no thinking is different from the blanking out of chasing away thoughts, no thinking, kind of a thinkingless state of mind pursued in other traditions. So he would kind of tell them apart by saying that kind of a practice which outwardly seem like very similar to blanking the mind, but at the same time is associated, kind of, it is accompanied by menga kebarje, accompanied by special instruction from a living, experienced master. Then such meditation, though at the surface may look very similar to blanking the mind, would have very different end result in kind of getting to know very subtle nature of mind. But in terms of what does that really come to in terms of something about mind, whether it is the empty nature of it or it is its subtle clear light nature, I'm not so sure. So anyway, the understanding is that Rigpa, which broadly speaking is similar to the primordial clear light mind in the parlance of these news translation schools. It's said to pervade all types of consciousnesses, including the very afflicted ones. But it's to convey something little different from what the news translation schools would understand in terms of the relationship between consciousness in general and the subtlest clear-light mind. Because from the news translation school also, our whole being, which can be divided into mind and body, is kind of ultimately linked to our clear-light mind and its accompanying energy. So in a way, it is not separated from there, let alone our own mind and body, but the entirety of phenomena can be traced back to the subtlest clear-light mind, so much so that it would be considered to be the basis of samsara and nirvana. So that aspect is not talking about emptiness. That aspect is not talking about things being mere projection of the mind, like the Chitta Matras are saying. Nor is it saying that things come from things can be overpowered or controlled by the mind. But it has something to do with almost like the original source of everything. So that would be a little different from, that would be not saying that there is one thing that is the source of everything. Broadly speaking, there is one which is the subtlest clear-light mind, but that is not one monolithic thing. Yeah. So apart from our own individual world, there's no world separate. And our individual world is what you call rooted in our own individual subtlest clear-light mind and the energy. So that is yet another aspect of the mind's function. And His Holiness Prayer says that's even more difficult and more subtle to understand. So, yeah, Rigpa is undefiled and Sem, which is mind, but I don't know if it's the mind as we usually understand. So the effort is to tell Rigpa apart from the Sem. So that means in the midst of the affliction, if one could succeed in keeping a distance from the affliction, yet retain it, then in the face of looking at it, while the mind actually does nothing but look, almost like there's no action there but look, so or be merely aware of it, then in the midst of it, there's this possibility of kind of getting a glimpse or an insight into the undefiled Rigpa aspect of it. So in that respect, it almost sounds more like the clear cognizant aspect. But that's not what is usually understood to be associated with. Rather, it is more aligned to subtler clear light mind. That would be mostly the subject matter of tantric presentations, if it were to be in the new translation schools. Yes.
I was reading I'll describe this, a book of some Westerners, maybe 20 years ago. They were scholars, but they're also practitioners, and they were studying hermits.
Mm-hmm.
And they went to, like, I think, I want to say like Spiti and places like that, whatever. And the one person they interviewed said that, which I'd never heard before, that Mahamudra was like looking from the, let's say, basis, path, and result, kind of path level, and Dzogchen was more result level perspective. Is that possible, or is that, I don't know? It was one yogi's, what he told them. It's what they recorded.
I see.
And I was thinking, well, these subtle minds are so subtle. Maybe it's just the perspective that you're looking at them from. I don't know.
Yeah, usually the stand is, although even for Mahamudra, is the Sutra level of Mahamudra and Tantra level of Mahamudra, at least from the perspective of Panchen Chögyен. But nonetheless, the usual understanding is the Mahamudra and the Dzogchen is kind of the approach of the Hatha Yoga Tantra. So from the new translation school perspective, it would be like talking about mind from the highest Yoga Tantra. And very often they are spoken of in terms of being the view. And that would be speaking of the view, not in terms of the objective view, but view in terms of subjective view in conjunction with the objective view as well. So that's the reason why very often this differentiation between what view constitutes in the Gelug perspective, or most of the, I think Gelug perspective, and what view constitutes in the Kagyu and Nyingma perspective, in terms of whether it is mere absence or even a presence, that's very often talked about. And very often people talk of them as being the difference, but it is not so much difference, even from the Gelug point of view. The highest Yoga Tantra, there are occasions when we speak of view from the subjective point of view. And at that time, the subjective component of the view would be the subtlest mind, with the objective mere negation view as its object. And that combination is spoken of as the view, in which case that view will not be mere negation. It will be a presence rather. So very often we speak of Dzogchen and even Mahamudra, not that we grade the two differently, but rather both of them as approaching from the Hatha Yoga Tantra. Any Venerable Senji, you had a question. Is it still there? Not necessary. I have some questions to deal with. True.
The one from last week was along my reading over the years. My question is there any relevance to this term of temporary cessation? I've heard it in the FPMT's Buddhist, I think Geshe Sering uses that along. He's talking about the Four Noble Truths. Is there any, how would you define that? What is the relevance, if any, on our progress along the path?
Oh, yeah.
To look for them, to support them, or how do they build for the final true cessation as we're going along the way?
Yeah, this is interesting. This is associated with a Tibetan term that I myself perplexed in how to really convey it. It is sosor tope shirap. So in English, they're sometimes translated as discursive wisdom, discriminative, sometimes discursive, or something like that. But it has to do with probing into the nature of the mind, or probing into the nature, ultimate nature of things. So cessation generated by a wisdom probing into the ultimate nature of mind is called sosor tango. Go is cessation obtained through the means of such a wisdom, which is probing in nature, and which gets to the ultimate nature, which means understanding emptiness. So cessation generated by an understanding of emptiness would be considered to be true cessation, lasting cessation. And the term is sosor tango, kind of the means by which you have obtained that is kind of built into the name of that cessation. So that's true cessation. So any cessation, any suspense of afflictions, like, oh, somebody is very angry, now is no more angry. But if it is not generated by an understanding of emptiness, that is a cessation, temporary cessation, because it is sosor tangmin gokpa. Gokpa is cessation generated or obtained not through the means of sosor tang bei shirap, not by the means of a probing wisdom. So it's not something we have to look for necessarily separately, but we have to keep doing what we do, and then we gain such cessations through our Shila practice, consistent, persistent Shila practice, concentration to a certain extent. Concentration to a certain extent can even undermine the seed of afflictions, so much so that it will almost seem like the seeds that you have gotten the seeds and they have been cleared, that afflictions will be kept at bay and will be kept from manifesting for long. But it's by the virtue of the strength of the concentration that one has even got down to the root of it and undermined it, but not uprooted it. So within the so-called temporary cessations, there would be degrees of how deep and lasting they could be. Yeah. So last time when I spoke about how the probability versus the possibility, so basically what I'm saying is that people undergo different experiences in the samsara, even in the backward eternity. So based on that, and that to a great extent, I should rather say as sentient beings, would be dependent on our own intention, our own choices. And thus, we may say people have done everything, but not in the sense that they would have done everything equally. And thus, and nor is there any guarantee that they would have done everything, because of course not everything, right? Not everything leading to nirvana. So much of it is left out. So there is no need for kind of a complete equality or equity, I was using the term, in terms of what we have done up to this point, despite the fact that we have been in existence from time immemorial. Right? So I was saying that it is possible that there could be someone who has not yet served as one's mother even once. It's possible. When I say possible, it is possible they have done it is also possible. When I say that it is possible for they have not been my mother up to now, at least once, even at least once. I'm also saying that it's possible that they may not be true also. I'm not saying it is possible and it's impossible in one breath. That would be contradictory. But I'm saying that it is possible that they may not have served as my mother, which is equal to saying it is even also possible that they may have served also. So the possibility part doesn't deny that the other one may have served, and that's why we could kind of rest assured we could still give the benefit of the doubt to everyone having served as not just once a mother, but for countless times. But at the same time, scientifically speaking, there's no guarantee, there's no necessity that it would have to be already there. So it's in tune with science. And I don't recall where, but I have heard His Holiness not explicitly bringing it up and elaborating on it, but did point to that. But because there is no way we could know for sure, we could always be giving the benefit of the doubt and saying they could have served. And thus, that will not be affected. But in terms of kind of being clear-cut, I think, speaking of the possibility of someone, I mean, along this line, possibility of someone having missed being this or that, etc. That's more in line with the reality. So because of that, we can make this distinction how someone got ahead of us and we are still behind, like that. Yeah, also the thing about when we speak of bodhicitta, when we speak that, yes, it could be lost at least at the initial stages. We're speaking of possibility. It's not guaranteed. It's not guaranteed to be lost. There's a possibility in that during that small pocket of time. During that small pocket of time means, see, we speak of 22 bodhicittas, right? 22 bodhicittas along the path to Buddhahood from the time you generated it. So it's not 22 different bodhicittas, but bodhicittas, what do you call it? Bodhicittas, what's the expression? Bodhicittas aligned with, or what do you call, associated with particular level of the path. So all of them are bodhicittas, but they have been specifically for the convenience of relating with them in terms of the progression of all the rest of the path. But now we speak of bodhicittas in chunks, from this point to this point, this point to this point. So that's how we come up with 22. Out of which only the first one is the one which is liable to be lost, not the second. And that the first one comes during the small level of the tree of the path of accumulation. And within that, it's very early stage. So it is not necessary that one necessarily has to lose it once one has generated it. So even though one may be an ordinary being, ordinary bodhisattva, but you can imagine how much effort and strength of mind it takes to generate bodhicitta, where all you think day and night is bodhicitta, aspiration, have aspiration to become Buddha, genuinely. Yeah, I'm trying to clear. Yeah, deal with any remaining question. Yeah, there's one which says, you mentioned in last Friday's, very last Friday's teaching that it is hard to come up with a watertight reasoning that we can develop good qualities limitlessly. Can you explain why? I remember clearly saying that. But what I was saying was, depending on how we understand by, what we understand by generating good qualities limitlessly, it will make a difference between whether we can defend such a position or not. So I was saying that in the case of qualities being developed limitlessly, it may not be tenable to understand it in the way we usually understand things, something being limitless. Because in the case of the Buddhas, you cannot say now the Buddhas have still more to grow. So, yeah, still more to grow. Although compassion can be developed limitlessly, and you can say, what about the compassion of the Buddha? Can it be developed limitlessly? Does it have still room to develop further? So, not in that sense, but limitlessly in the sense of what strength and power, ability it has to show up in ways that one can hardly imagine. When, how, etc. So limitless in that sense that even the Buddhas among themselves cannot say that this is the limit by which you could show up, or by which you could. This is the limit. This is the limit for your compassion to extend to this being, not this being, to that occasion, not that occasion, etc., etc. So in that form, so in all types of ways, the possibility is unimaginable, and even the Buddhas, because there is no limit, even the Buddhas cannot see the limit. So that's another way of calling it. So that's what I meant. So that means if we understand limitless in a different way, then that's otherwise. If we define it in our usual way, then no reasoning can because it will be in contradiction with what we claim the state of Buddhahood to be. Yeah. So in terms of why consciousness is able to take up a reside, we already talked about that. There is this additional need of life. So that's another topic. We usually don't speak of that in the Buddhist context, but it is very relevant because in science they speak of life, not necessarily sentient, although they do not rule it out, but there's no clear proof for that. Whereas from a Buddhist perspective, we can speak of things with life, but not being. So the being part is the sentient one. But in both of them, in both those cases, to have life is common. So for being a sentient, it has to have life, and life is different from might. But then what connects them? See, in the case of our samsaric condition, it's our karma, karmic force. So in terms of scriptures, there may be more detailed explanations in the highest yoga tantra, particularly Kala Chakra also. But in the sutra level, you usually find these more covered in the Abhidhamma circle of teachings. And very often except for few what do you call fine tunings and adaptations. Most of it will be something acceptable to all the schools, all the philosophical schools. I think it's already time we should stop here. Otherwise, if we stop in middle, then you do not get meditate as much. It's the time is lost. Yeah, I think I have done away with this. Done away with the questions. Touched all the questions. Yeah, so we will have we'll have time next time. Yeah. Okay, let's, yeah.